Hi, everyone. We've had a little glitch. Thank you for bearing with us. Miriam, do you want to give yourself a little,
Sure.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
So
I can
welcome
pop
to
back
Star
in.
Child. Yeah, this is our launch. Thank you so much for
Inaugural.
being here. And I'm so grateful to be joined on this topic of the intersection of neurodiversity and trauma and intuition with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Miriam Shiferaw. And I would love for her to introduce herself to everybody.
Sure. My name is Dr. Miriam, and I am a former pediatrician, medical epidemiologist. I've worn many hats in my life. I was a public health epidemiologist, medical epidemiologist for almost a decade, working at the CDC. And I worked in humanitarian emergency response work. Um, and disease prevention and response. Also did a stint in pharma doing research, um, supporting research development. And about 7, 8 years ago, I had reached a point of burnout and experienced my own spiritual awakening, where I began to tap into my natural gifts and abilities and became really curious about spirituality and energy medicine and holistic health and medicine. And so that led me to where I am today, which is I'm an inner child healer, certified spiritual life coach, and play ambassador. And so I'm really, really excited to be here. I know we share a mission in creating safe spaces for both children and adults to heal. And so anything that you are a part of, I am happy to support. I love you. I believe in what you're doing. And so, yeah, tell the people why Star Child, why now? Just really excited.
Oh, thank you. Well, the feeling's absolutely mutual, Miriam. Really, I'm just so grateful. Why Star Child? Why now? Well, I'm an OT for a long time, and I was a sensitive child, sensory sensitive, and also tapped in sensitive, imaginary friends. I could see spirit. I lived in a really old house where I grew up. I could see all sorts of things and sense all sorts of things. And I had abilities that kind of got pretty strong when I was in my late teens, but then I kind of freaked out about everything, closed it off, and
Mhm.
completed my studies, got married, started having children, and everything kind of came back online for me. I woke back up. I was having full recall of the things I had been able to do. And I was very passionate and interested about exploring this side of myself, but I had really no one to talk to. I just started
Mhm.
wondering about all these little sensitive kids I'm working with, like what, as an OT, what if these sensory sensitive children were like me? At least some of them, what if they're tuning in, tapped in, super empathic, sensing things? And as soon as I
Right.
started just having that thought in my mind, opened my mind to that as a possibility, the children really confirmed it for me. They just would say things to me out of the blue. And I'll share some of those stories today. But
Amazing.
yeah, so then I opened up to that possibility, and then I've kind of been weaving that into my work, doing a lot of training and energy and different things in different ways to help these sensitive kids. And around 2017, this is all happening 20, I woke up around 2007, 2008, and started implementing some things around 2011, 2012. And then by 2017, I'd done a lot of training, opened up a place for adults, um, energy work, energy medicine. And then it's really been my mission to combine both worlds, like to really be able to be in an authentic place. I really do think I'm so grateful every day to the telepathy tapes for opening up this conversation for
Yeah.
so many people, because I
Mhm.
think it's what's given me the courage, including from you, my dear friend, Dr. Miriam, about having the courage to create a platform for people that was beyond just the traditional
Mhm.
OT support, and it
Mhm.
came out of a place of necessity. I've got bills to pay,
Yeah.
I got rent, and I was trying to find ways to diversify um the income, and I was going to just do like a normal OT platform, and Miriam was like, I don't know, you might want to think about that. You might want to think about doing something a little bit more a little bit extra. So I did, and
We're so glad that you did.
here we are, and here we are.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
anyway, um, yeah, so I wanted to take just a few minutes to just define some of these terms that we're going to be speaking about today, and knowing that we're really going to be coming from a place of our personal and professional lived experiences. This isn't so much about giving you a lot of statistics, or we can talk a little bit to that, but there's also linked on our resource page on Star Child. There's some information there where you can get some more of that technical kind of information. But we just really want to have a conversation about
Yeah.
what we've experiencing and what we believe. Um, so neurodiversity is kind of more of a movement. It's this idea that people experience, and this is from Harvard Health Publishing. Neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways, and that there's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. And the most important thing about the concept of neurodiversity is that these differences are not viewed as deficits. We're not looking at this as like a problem, right? When we talk
Right.
about neurodiversity. And now this can include diagnosis like the ADHD, the OCD, the autism spectrum ASD, but really we are beginning to view those diagnoses as more neurotypes. At least several people are beginning to kind of see that as like, again, where this isn't a deficit, it's just a different way that the brain works. So that's kind of talking about the neurodiversity.
Hmm.
The definition of trauma from the American Psychological Association is any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, hopelessness, helplessness, disassociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behaviors, and other aspects of functioning. Um, and that's pretty like inclusive. And as we know, we've heard in more pop culture, even from like people like Brene Brown, talking about things like big T and little t. So the bigger traumas, the long-lasting traumas, the very intense traumas, and also the little t, the things that might feel really big to us, but might not look big to the world, right? And they can
Right.
be both, they're both valid. Both
That's
valid.
right. That's right.
And then, as far as intuition goes, the Oxford Dictionary defines intuition as the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning. I think that's a really good definition.
Hmm. It's that gut feeling.
Yes, it's like the
Yeah.
download that you get too,
Yeah.
or
That
when you
knowing.
find yourself giving really good advice to somebody and you're like, where did that come from? That was great advice. Is that could be an example of it as well.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I thought, it's kind of hard since we're looking at different aspects of these and how they're intertwined. Um, I wanted to kind of look at the neurodiversity and intuition kind of crossover, you know, where we're
Yeah.
seeing, and I know this has been talked about in the telepathy tapes for the children who and adults who are non-speakers, but I don't know, I'm sure about with you, Miriam, I've certainly experienced that it is not limited to non-speakers. I see children having immense intuitive capabilities who are in that neurodiverse kind of realm, ADHD, things like that. Has that been your experience as well?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of my work with inner child healing, and I use different approaches in my coaching work, shamanic healing practices, guided visualizations, and when um, when we go to those places where people experience trauma in early childhood, it's really interesting because I've had many clients who um, were didn't understand their intuition. Of course, they're like little children, didn't understand what they were tapping into, didn't understand what they were feeling. And so children mostly just understand, feelings. They don't fully understand the nuances of, what is mine, what is yours, what I could be
Hmm.
picking up from my
Hmm.
surroundings. And so I think children in general are very open, highly intuitive. We all are until we shut it off at a certain point, right? Most people say around age 7, we sort of shut it down. So before that, we're very open. We're able to tap into our senses. Um, but without anyone, I mean, it's just now we start talking about consciousness and intuition and spiritual gifts and abilities. But in the past, at least when I was a child, probably when you were a child, this wasn't something that we talked about, wasn't something that our parents talked to us
Hmm.
about, schools, nothing. We didn't have that sort of mentorship, spiritual mentorship to really understand and to help us even with emotional regulation and what we could be sensing into. And so, um, and also with that neurodiversity, like being able to understanding the world in a different way, being able to learn um, or needing to learn in a different way was also not really explored. So we were all sort of conditioned to be sort of cookie cutter worker bees, right? And so I think that um, push to conform is something really important to talk about in terms of
Hmm.
when the disconnection from ourselves and from our intuition sort of began, and the question of are we all sort of neurodiverse. I think I've shared with you that I believe we're all neurodiverse, right? And that we're sort of pushed into conformity and, what we call neurotypical. But I think all children are neurodiverse and have different unique ways of learning and interacting with the world. And so, um, yeah, so I think there is a lot of um, overlap and question as to, what's neurodiversity, what's intuition. I mean, I think they're not mutually exclusive, right? I think being tuned in to different frequencies, different energies, which we know many neurodiverse, which we
Hmm.
know is an aspect, let's say, of
Hmm.
neurodiversity.
Hmm.
It's an aspect of neurodiversity, and I think it's something that children just aren't taught. We weren't taught as children, right? I too am neurodiverse. Again, we're all neurodiverse, I believe, but for the purposes of this call and what most people understand, I have also diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. I have a child with ADHD and sensory processing. Um, I like to say sensitivities, not disorder. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, there were lots of things that I didn't understand as a child
Hmm.
that I was picking up on um, in terms of energy that I didn't understand and ways of learning and being in school and my environment that I didn't understand. And frankly, no one really asked, right? No one really asks you, how do
Right.
you like to learn? How would you like this to be presented to you? You
Certainly
know what I
not when
mean?
we were growing up,
Yeah,
and certainly
yeah.
not when I was growing up. I know you you're a bit younger than I am, but and it's funny because when you were talking about that, being a child and experiencing things like when I was
Mhm.
growing up in the 19 a lot I was born in the early 70s, but was growing up in the 1980s, and I did happen to grow up as Catholic, and what was in the zeitgeist for, you know, spiritual stuff was very demonic and Catholic. Like,
Right.
think about like The Exorcist and,
Oh,
all
yeah.
these really scary films that I grew, Damien Omen, like all that stuff. Like,
Mhm.
that I watched when I was way too young and that definitely imprinted on me. But that's kind of what the imprint was for this. It certainly wasn't anything that was empowering. It was like, it's a problem, right? Or any of
Yeah,
these things. It's
scary.
demonic, we're all scary. And then
Yeah,
also just, like the way you say, I appreciate you saying that. I just think, and I don't think we have it right now, like with our schools. We don't have it
right.
right for these kids. We are not
Right.
supporting these kids in the I'm looking like big picture right now. There are some
Yeah.
places that do it well, but if we're looking
Hmm.
at the majority of the public schools, and speaking, we're in the United States, so speaking more to the United States, there's
Hmm.
just a lot of problematic things about the way that our children are schooled, and some of that is like taking movement away. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how that all that
Hmm.
embodiment is so important to the development of intuition, right? And the embodiment, and also just to, there's some
Absolutely.
interesting tie-in back to the combination of like the neurodiversity and intuition is like there's a lot of, I don't know if you, a lot of people are discussing, this concept of pattern recognition, right? With a person with a neurodiverse brain can almost like subconsciously recognize patterns,
Hmm.
sometimes more than the social intuition, right? Of the people who are either neurotypical or who have learned those skills, as they've, grown. So there tends to be this larger amount of pattern recognition or fast thinking. Like I've seen a lot of these very, very bright people who are on the spectrum who can come to these rapid answers of very complex mathematical, equations or something like that, and without
Hmm.
almost always being able to explain how they know. And I think that that kind
Hmm.
of ties into that pattern recognition thing, right? I've
Yeah.
certainly seen kids both on the spectrum and not diagnosed with anything, just maybe some sensory issues or ADHD, being very much in their own world, in their own realm. And I kind of think they kind of are in their own world or in their own realm. And while I think that's wonderful, we also just want to make sure, and we'll talk some more about this too, is but it's
Yeah.
important for to help our children be embodied and grounded in this body because we are in a body, we're here.
True.
So the more empowered we can feel in our bodies,
That's
the
true.
better. It's not all about being up and away.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
love that you said that. It's
Yeah.
interesting, but you were talking about kids who just sort of know,
Hmm.
and not being able to say how. It made me think about how we're often, at least in school, in the early years of school, we're asked to explain like how we got to something, right? And so how we've sort of in early childhood, we are sort of conditioned to um, sort of switch from, sort of right brain, creative, imagination to
Hmm.
more logical, left brain, scientific. And both are important,
Hmm.
right? But it's
Hmm.
interesting when you said that, I was like, it's true. Like, I know my son, for example, he'll get to an answer and he has a harder time explaining how he got to an
Hmm.
answer, right? And so,
Yes.
and isn't that what intuition is, right? It's like is being able to tap into um, something, right?
Hmm.
An energy field, right? A library of information outside of just what is available to us here on Earth, right? And simply know things um, without necessarily being able
Hmm.
to explain the how, right? So
Hmm.
just it made me think about that sort of conflict with how do we
Hmm.
help our children build or cultivate their spiritual gifts and abilities and stay connected to their inner knowing, their inner truth
Hmm.
and their inner knowing,
Hmm.
um, while also helping them develop um, some of those skills around being able to, explain steps and
Right.
logic and order, right? Reasoning,
Hmm.
all the different educational terms that I don't know because I'm not an educator, but how do we balance the
Sure.
two, right? And then
That's
left
right.
brain, right brain, right? And I think it's important to talk about balance because we're not just one thing and not
That's
just
right.
left brained, right? Yeah.
That's right. I think balance is such an
Hmm.
important thing for so many people. And it's just kind of interesting, when I think about these little kids, I talked earlier about when I started opening my mind and the children just started talking to me and saying things to me. And I think that,
Yeah.
the other thing is that like kids know if you're open about it. They know if they can say something to you.
Hmm.
They feel it. So that's
Right.
that level of intuition, right? So like when I started opening up, nobody's saying anything to me about any of this stuff. And then all of a sudden, when I had that aha moment where I'm like, wait, what if these kids are tapped in? You wouldn't believe what they started saying to me. It's just
What
remarkable.
were they
I've had,
saying? What
well,
were some of the things they were saying?
some of the things they were saying is I don't, like things like I don't turn that one light switch on in the bathroom because that's when I see the ghost. Or
Hmm.
I know that there is they full recall or like varying degrees of recall of past lives,
Right. Hmm.
They'll have either full-blown memories like beyond 4 or 5. I did work with a 7 or 8 year old who had a full recall of, I mean, a full blow by blow recall of a past life. And this person was not on the spectrum, the mother was at a loss. It was not within her belief house. They were a Christian
Right.
family, and but she knew that it was true for her son. And when I met with him and he told me everything, I knew that was true. It was a true experience, and he was recalling it. So there are things like that. I've had people, kids tell me about future humans that are helping us. I've had kids tell me that they're from another planet with a
Right.
parent, but their sibling and their father aren't from the other planet. I mean, it's like kind of, and I'm pretty good, being an OT for almost 30 years, I'm pretty good recognizing a script. Sometimes people who
Mm-hmm.
are on the spectrum use scripting language, which they'll say something that's like a quote from a movie or,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a TV show or a YouTube video because that's a replacement for them being able to, it's a way for them to express themselves, but it's scripted,
Right.
right? It's something
Right.
else. It's just it's an attempt for communication. But
Right.
as I'm listening to these kids tell me these things, I'm like using my own pattern recognition, right? And like I'm like,
Right.
this is not a script. I can
Right.
tell the difference because when you're scripting, there's a very specific tone to the voice. It's like being able to imitate something so perfectly, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a very specific,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like they're in a trance saying it.
Mm-hmm.
This was not, none of
Yeah.
these experiences were that. So just these really wild
Wow.
experiences, even sometimes because I am, I'm clairvoyant and I can see energy and perceive things, and I'll see all this stuff with the kids that come in, right? um and sometimes I'll see, there's this really fascinating example of this child that I was working with who, when I saw him, he had all this energy coming off of his body, like a golden spray of sparkles, it looked like. And I was just very
Mm-hmm.
curious. I hadn't ever seen anything like that. And I said nothing. And he just a bright, sparkly little soul, and, and he says to me at some point, he's very excited. And like, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes after this, I saw this initially. He says to me, you know what? I'm going to tell you something. He's like, because I was talking to him about being safe in the space and it's important and we want to make sure we feel safe in places. And he said, he's like, oh, you know what happens to me when I feel safe? And I said, no, what happens to you when you feel safe? He's like, I get these golden sparkles and they spray out of my
Oh my God, I
body.
love that.
And
I
I was
love
like,
that.
I was just looking, I was like, really, you do? I was like, because you know what? I saw them earlier when you came in. I
Mm.
could see it. And he's like, well, it's happening now. He's like, I feel so good and so safe. And so, it's a validation to me that what I'm getting is right. And all I'm doing when I'm seeing that information is I'm not always talking about it or sharing with it. I just hold
Right.
it and I just get
Right.
curious about it, if I need
Right.
to say something about it. So it's just these
Wow. I
wonderful,
love that.
or there's many other examples, but children
Mm-hmm.
will tell this when they're doing art or when we're engaged in play. And it's just so validating to me, that
Yeah.
these kids are
Thank
so
you.
tapped in. They're
They're so
so
tapped
tapped
in.
in.
Thank you.
And they
Thank you for
sense,
sharing that.
right? They sense
Yeah,
it.
they
They
do
sense
sense.
it. They know
Hmm.
who
They
they
do
can
sense
share it
it.
with. We have
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, go ahead.
there's one other thing I'll share because this is a great
Hmm.
example of that. There's a child that was coming in. It wasn't working with me. It was with another one of the therapists on my team.
Hmm.
And and this is included in the Star Child membership, we have a number of coloring pages that have these healing symbols on them. It's on the child printables um on the Star Child platform. If you go to the
Hmm.
printable section, there's like some coloring pages of Auric Light Alchemy healing symbols. Anyway, this one kid was looking at these symbols, and there's no word at the time. We didn't have them as affirmations. We just had them as the
Hmm.
symbol, like coloring pages. And he's looking through them. He's like, "Oh yeah, I know what these are. I've seen these." And the therapist is like, "Oh, really? What do you tell me more? Where'd you see him?" And he's like, "Oh, I see him there. This one is connected to these aliens that are helping us." So we were like, "What?" And we just our job with these kids is just we get curious, we validate
Hmm.
their feeling, like even if we don't understand. So if we start saying that's not true or you can't do
Right.
that, that's going to shut it off really quick. So just
Right.
staying open and getting curious. So the therapist did that exactly. She was staying open. Wow, tell me more. And then he would eventually was talking about it so much and being connected to these aliens and so much with every time he came in that she mentioned to the father, who's like a science guy, And she's like, well, little Johnny over here is talking about, is he got a special interest of ETs or something? Because he's talking about this. And the father just looked at her and he said, um, I've never ever heard them talk about that ever in my life. So
Hmm.
again, the children sense who they can, they're safe to
Yeah.
share.
Yeah, I
So
imagine it can
fascinating.
feel very scary for many people, and we often fear what we don't understand, right? And so, I have deep empathy and I can respect that as well, right? That
Hmm.
part. And I think one of the most important things that you mentioned was around the safety piece, which I think would be a great segue into the trauma piece. But
Yes.
how children who are neurodiverse, or all of us in our neurodiversity, we feel and they feel safer to be their full selves and to come out and show all their colors, the safer they feel. And so I think that's what it speaks to, that the safety and the safe environment that you've created that allows children to feel comfortable enough and safe enough to share something that they maybe wouldn't share in other
Hmm.
environments. So I think that's
That's
really
right.
important, that we are beginning to create environments where children can feel can feel safe, and that's um, something that, I too am a channel. I too can connect with spirits and energies in different ways. And this
Hmm.
isn't a talk on sort of the different clairs, but I think, as we're talking, I'm like, oh, I'm sure people would be interested in
Hmm.
understanding how intuition shows up and how different spiritual gifts and abilities show up. And so I have my own way of connecting with energy and spirits and all of that. Um, and the safety piece is so important. So I've channeled the children, sort of the consciousness of the children before, and they've spoken to me about safe environments. And when I've
Hmm.
asked, how can I be an advocate? How can I, use my voice to advocate and support the children who are here now? Um, and of course inner children as well, which is my main part of my work. But and the answer I got was around um, safe environments. So creating safe environments, and not
Hmm.
just external environments, but internal environments, which
Hmm.
was really
Hmm.
interesting. Was interesting to hear. And they just made it a point to clarify not just external environments. So we're not just talking about safe schools or safe healing place environments, or safe healing sanctuaries or places for healing, but or even safe ex home environments even, but safe internal environments. And so, kind of what does that look like to have a safe internal environment? And I'm sure for us, it triggers immediately the nervous system, right? We're talking about the
Hmm.
nervous system and what felt safety is in the body.
Hmm.
And so an environment may look safe on the outside. We're just looking at it with our eyes, may have all the bells and whistles and colors and look safe, but it may not feel safe
Hmm.
to the child. And so they may not feel safe to come out and be their authentic selves, right? And that's
Hmm.
work that you and I have done for years, is reconnecting with our authentic selves and being able to having the courage to show up authentically out into the world, even with our science backgrounds and the
Yes.
professions that you're still in, that I was in as a physician, an MD. This would have been just highly criticized. Talking about
Hmm.
this stuff, I certainly was not trained in any of it back then, and we were not even trained to think about it in this way. But I think it's just really interesting, and I'll pivot back to you on this, that, autism, I always had such a fascination with children with autism. Um, I didn't really know why, but I was always just super fascinated. And at the time when I was in practice a very long time ago, and I'm no longer in practice now, there wasn't a ton of autism. I mean, there probably was, but we just wasn't on our radar at the time,
That's
right?
right.
But I was super fascinated. And
Yes.
the word autism at its root because I remember I looked this up ages ago, means self. It's like auto or self or turning inward, which I thought was so fascinating. I'm like, because these children are themselves, right? They are like pure authenticity, right? And so I was really fascinated with that, and it's made me, now in the work that I do with inner child healing and authenticity, helping people reconnect with their authenticity. It's made me realize or ask the questions like, what are these children here to teach us and show us about being authentic and being themselves? And so, what would it look like if these children felt more safe and we tried to
Mm,
create more environments where they felt safe enough to show up authentically?
that's right.
Those are
I
the kind of
know.
questions I think about, right?
That's I hope where we're going, and
Yeah.
globally. Also, like, with if we're looking at like just to distinguish, I appreciate all that, Miriam. It's really important for us to talk through these ideas. If we're looking at the link between trauma and intuition, it's slightly different. And I know that
Hmm.
this is something you've got a lot of experience in, but, I'll just briefly say that, the traumatic events can cause more of the nervous system dysregulation so that you have things like hypervigilance. If you've been in trauma and haven't really healed from that, you can be very hypervigilant, which can look like sensory overwhelm, right? And it
Hmm.
can be both because, there's the
Hmm.
whole idea that being, many people would argue that being on the spectrum or having autism or having these neurodiversities can be traumatic in and of itself, especially when the needs aren't
Oh,
met,
yeah.
especially
Right.
when, that's trauma. I mean, so it's kind of all wrapped in, but so traumatic events can kind of create this hypervigilance to the environment, and thus it can also really lean into that fawning thing. Like if they've had an abuser, or if somebody that they've grown up around hasn't been or felt safe, um, there's this need to fawn and make sure that person's needs are met before my needs are met. Because if theirs feeling good, I'm safer, like this idea of the safety. And then
Hmm.
this distorted pattern recognition, like also like this idea of survivor's intuition. So would you speak a little bit about to the intuition trauma access a little bit?
Yeah. So in my work, what I've noticed, and I bring in I'm not just trauma informed, but also very trauma responsive. So what that means is I help people understand what their state of their nervous system is, what
Mhm,
their particular stress response looks like, whether it's flight, fight, fawn, um, or freeze, right? So
mhm,
not a lot of people are familiar with that language. Not a lot of people have think about their nervous system and their stress response and what that looks like. And it looks different for different people. So flight looks different in different people. It can look like a workaholic. It can look like someone who travels all the time, like that escapism shows up in different ways, right? Fawning, sort of that people pleasing. Fight, is a little bit more obvious, right? Kind of wanting to fight or anger, but um, and then the freeze response, people who generally feel like they're stuck in their life or they don't feel like they have any direction. So that's what it looks like on the outside. And I try to help people understand these are all protective mechanisms. These are ways that your nervous
mhm,
system and that you learn to protect yourself to feel
mhm,
safe enough to function or even be in this world. But what I try
mhm,
to do is help people go back to that time and place where they learned that response would keep them safe, right? Like where they learned that it wasn't safe, basically, before that stress response came online. Um, and so the question becomes, when did I learn that I would be more safe if I paid attention to everything that's going on in the room or was like hyper focused on the emotions of others? Like, where did I learn to
mhm,
become hypersensitive to other people's emotions? When did I first begin to notice that? And a lot of people don't, a lot of that is in the subconscious, right? Or people are unconscious. They're not aware of even where that began. And so that's where I think having a practitioner, somebody who can help with inner child healing or not sort of like cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't really touch on that, right? Because a lot of it is unconscious and offline.
Hmm.
Folks don't just remember the first time. And so a lot of it is trauma from childhood that we've suppressed, or and talk about the big T, small t trauma. Like, you know, I think you and I've talked about this. Anything that feels unsafe in the body is trauma, right? It doesn't matter how big or small it
Right.
is. It
That's right.
literally feels the same in the body, whether you're in war or having a dental extraction. It feels the same in the body, right? So I really also try to help people realize that, PTSD is a lot more common than we think. And
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know the numbers, but I just know that from what I see in my practice, working with clients, I see a lot of PTSD. I see a lot of hypervigilance,
Hmm.
and folks aren't even aware of it, complex PTSD. And so that's that sort of overlap that we might see with
Yes.
trauma and intuition is what is true intuition versus what's hypervigilance, right? And so, um, yeah, it can be really it is really confusing for children, also adults. But just I try to help the adults that I work with see how, as a child,
Hmm.
how that could have been really confusing for them naturally, and how they
Hmm.
would have learned to sort of shut it down, shut their intuition down if, they experience a traumatic event. Like myself, right? I experienced childhood sexual trauma, to be honest. Um, and if you're taught to be silent and, oh no, that didn't happen, or if you express, if I
Hmm.
share that with somebody and they tell me that's not true, that didn't happen, right? That would lead me to distrust myself and say, oh well, what I
Mm.
was feeling
Hmm.
must be inaccurate, right?
Hmm.
And so that's sort of where we learn to like shut off. Some of us learn to shut off our
Hmm.
intuition, or many of us really is folks not validating our feelings, telling us what we're thinking, what we feel, not thinking, but telling us what we feel isn't real, um, or to just to be quiet about it. Sort of, we sort of shut it down. So it can be really confusing to know what's real, what is my intuition telling me versus, am I just being very like hyper vigilant, or what you might call an empath? Like, is that true spiritual gift and ability, or is that something that I learned? Is that a learned trauma response? And I think it's
Hmm.
nuanced. I don't think there's a one answer or one way to
Yeah.
answer or look at any of this. I think you just need to be open. We need to be open, and as practitioners, just curious and exploratory in nature, and just asking questions, gently, to try
Hmm.
and sort of uncover sort of what the root is,
Right.
and whether it is true intuition
Hmm.
versus whether it's a trauma response.
Right.
So we've got to be gentle and careful, and when we're exploring that, you can probably speak to um, sort of how, as an adult, if an adult asks you, how do you know if it's intuition versus just
Yeah.
my anxiety or my
Yeah.
OCD, whatever, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that, and I first will say I'm going to do a little vulnerable share. I have experienced early childhood trauma, including early childhood sexual trauma, and more than once, and then that type of trauma, sexual trauma, through my early adulthood. Um, and I've had PTSD diagnosed because of some of these events.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm intuitive, and I know I'm neurodiverse, and I know it's not just trauma because I can have very early memory of being so sensory sensitive before these traumas started, and it is diagnosed in my family of origin. So, there's a lot of complexity here. And what I want to say to people is that kind of heightened nervous system, like raised up heart rate, like panicked, rushed voice is not the voice of intuition. Typically, that panic, rushed voice could be coming from anxiety, it could be coming from trauma, a dysregulated nervous system.
Hmm.
In my experience, and I think you share this, Miriam, belief, is that when I know it is my intuition that's speaking, it is clear, it is not rushed, even if there's action necessary. It
Right.
might be like, you need to call this person, or it's much more neutrally presented to
Yeah.
me. And I know
No
that when
urgency.
no urgency, not like, oh my
Exactly.
God, the kids, you better check your kids. They're who's driving where, like get them on the tracker. It's more like, call your son. You need to talk, or you need to reach out to your mom, or you need to do this, and you
Hmm.
just learn to listen to that voice. And if I know if the voice is coming in panicked, the first thing that I try to do is I need to regulate my nervous system. Take some
Yeah.
deep breaths. I could take an ice cube and put it on the bridge of my nose. I could put cold water on my wrists. I could do square breathing. There's a number of different somatic practices out there that are available to us to get ourselves calm. And I think sometimes that noise, that distortion, it's good to start to pay attention to, if is this my intuition or is this anxiety? Because the adults that I work with, that's a huge question that comes up all the time. Well, how do I know it's my
Hmm.
intuition?
Me
The
too.
intuition
Hmm.
is a neutral voice in my experience. It's not from a place of urgency. It doesn't have the accompanying physiological autonomic nervous system responses like the heart
Hmm.
rate and sometimes there can be a little bit of a sour stomach feeling if I know this is not a safe situation, and I might go and I'll feel it in my body. There is one
Hmm.
other thing that I want to say though about that, what you were mentioning earlier about that disconnection is when you say something to be true, and then if you're somebody tells you, well, that's not true or something. What that teaches us to do is it's kind of disconnects us from this very important sensory processing aspect called interoception, which is basically
Hmm.
the body's ability to you to recognize the cues of hunger, cues of fullness, cues of thirst, bathroom cues, heart rate, and
Yeah.
emotions. Emotions are
Hmm.
included in that. And so many people that I've worked with, whether they're neurodiverse, traumatized, or a combination of the two, have a really hard time naming their emotional state, naming what something feels like. So just
Hmm.
beginning to notice sensations and notice emotions and paying attention to the internal state is very healing, and that can help build our intuition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. So emotional regulation piece is so important, which starts with naming, being able to name it. I totally agree with you. Yeah, and I think, I think the thing that the three things we're talking about today have in common is the nervous system, right? Whether it's neurodiversity,
Yes.
trauma, or intuition. So
Yes.
it's not one or the other in my mind. I don't see it like that. I think that if you've experienced complex childhood trauma, it can be, I'll say that, right? That it can be confusing when you're trying to reconnect with your intuition and your knowing or your spiritual gifts and abilities. But it is 1,000% possible to. It's
Mhm.
just really focusing on the nervous system regulation and embodiment piece and bringing in somatic practices to get to learn how to reconnect with our bodies, reconnect with nature, with the earth, right, to help
Mhm.
regulate our nervous system. That then really quite naturally helps us connect back with our inner antennas, our intuition, our inner knowing, and celebrate our neurodiversity. So
Yes.
it's like you
It's
have to
like a
look at it
hologram.
all together. Yes, we got to look at all of it together. Yeah.
I know. It's so, I think things can look so. I think if there may be some, people wondering, like, well, how do I know if this is like a sensory shutdown or if it's like a dissociation from a trauma or I think it's always good to take all of that into consideration. But like
Hmm.
Miriam was saying, doing the nervous system work to regulate the nervous system, the things that we do as OTs, bringing in the muscle work, that kind of heavy work,
Hmm.
getting connected, grounding into the body, connecting, being in nature, all of those things are going to help because if some of this
Hmm.
hypervigilance or traumatic presentation can also be soothed and healed by the things we do in OT for the sensory kids. So
Absolutely.
it's like,
Absolutely.
it's
So
you're,
important.
yes, you're paying attention to what your
Hmm.
patterns are, what your profiles are, but it's also just like knowing that these things can be healing for both, that I think is helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think never has the
Dysregulation,
field of
mood
OT
swings. Yeah.
been more, I
Yes.
think never has the field of OT been more important or needed than now. I think it's incredible. Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the most important things for children in terms of access to support healing, to support development is going to be,
Mm.
occupational therapy. I think
Well,
we're going to see that more.
I think you're right. And I think that also like, you know, um, it's just I've always thought that, I've always thought as an OT,
Hmm.
I'm like every person would benefit from knowing how the nervous system works. I've always felt like that
Absolutely.
in the 90s, throughout all of the early 2000s. I've always had that thought like this is good for everybody. Everybody should know what we
Hmm.
know. It's
Well,
so
finally.
important. Ugh,
Yeah,
it's like there,
finally.
and thankfully there's more attention to all of this coming out. I think really I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure we did have some several people
Questions?
who wrote in with questions. So I'm just gonna
Hmm.
start going through some of the questions, and I think there might be one we can take any live questions after these other questions that came in. Okay.
If you don't mind,
Yeah.
I wanted to add one thing before we switch to questions around the
Yes,
safety
yes,
piece that
yes.
ties into sort of wanting to connect with your intuition or reconnect with your intuition, your spiritual gifts and abilities,
Mm,
and healing from trauma and nervous system regulation. I think that it's really important for folks to know that the phrase, if it can, it will. What I mean by that is if we feel safe enough to do something, we will. And so if
hmm.
something is not coming online for folks, or folks are having a hard time reconnecting to their intuition, um, or memory, or whatever it may be, to trust that there's a reason and not to rush the
Mm,
process, right? So our nervous system, our stress responses were developed to keep us safe.
yes.
And so I think that the safety piece is really the most important piece to look at and to support yourself, speaking to the audience, to support yourself in creating or cultivating a sense of safety within your body will be the most important thing in the foundational work. And from there, you can build upon everything else. It will come naturally, but not to force anything or try to dig and find things that we may not be ready to see or find. So I just wanted
Mm,
to highlight that as well. That our stress responses, our trauma responses came online to protect us and to keep us
that's
safe.
right. That's
And so
right.
we have to um, honor that and be mindful and careful as we do the healing work. And so finding practitioners and healing spaces that feel safe are going to be really important for that, for whether it's spiritual development or
Yes.
trauma healing work. So thank you.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. And furthermore, like if you're feeling like if you like, let's say you have a presentation that's both neurodiverse and trauma, and you're very highly activated and you're having a hard time, you work through the trauma, like any kind of healing
Hmm.
through that trauma is going to help to bring the more clear aspect of the
That's right.
intuition online
Yep.
instead of just being feeling bombarded. And
Yeah.
whether that's
That's
from
right.
trauma or the neurodiversity, it's like the grounding, the settling, the reconnection to the body and in the subtle
Hmm.
ways through the interoception is really going to help to like bring all this online. So I appreciate you saying that. Thank you, Miriam. I 100% agree. Okay, so we got a few questions that came in, and I'm just going to go ahead and
All right.
read them out, and then we'll just kind of weigh in. Okay, so the first question that I got was for those of us who have trauma in our background, are neurodivergent and empathic, what are the tools and practices we can use as adults and share with our kids to protect our energy or tools and practices for healing? And furthermore, how do we talk about this with our kids?
Hmm.
Oof.
Great question.
Um, it's a great question. So, I think what we were just talking about and what you and I know, Miriam, is going through the grounding practices, going through the nervous system kind of resets, really paying attention to the healing work that needs to happen. And, and this is so simple. We can practice mindful moments with our children. One of my favorite things is like, it's really hard when somebody's in distress to teach them a tool. Like, so if they're having a
Right,
meltdown or whatever, that's not the time to go to tell your kid to take a deep breath necessarily,
right,
because if you
right,
think about a time you were activated and somebody put their hand on your shoulder and were like, just take a deep breath.
right.
Yeah, that doesn't always read well. So it's no different for our children. So what I like to do is
Hmm.
practice these little mindful moments, especially when there's a
Yeah,
physical action of putting your hand on your heart, taking a deep breath before we drive the car away, after we buckle up, while we're sitting down, when there's no stress. Like we sit down before we eat a meal together, let's take a collective deep breath and say something we're grateful for, or something like that. But when you practice doing that in times of non-stress, you may then be able to look at your child across the room if they're having a hard time and simply do the action and do it without take a deep breath. We can just give them the visual cue. And even if they choose to do it or not, they're getting it from their mirror neurons through their brain, and their brain, it's a benefit for them watching you do it, even if they refuse to participate. So that's a mark
absolutely. Yeah,
encouragement. Yeah.
yeah. That co-regulation piece is really important. And I think one of the core things that I think is being asked in the question as well is around energy hygiene. So I
Hmm.
think, how do
Hmm.
we create routine or rituals around energy hygiene practices for ourselves, for our children, for our household? And so I think that could be really helpful, is just like really early on, talking to your kids about energy, around about their energy bodies. There are definitely more books out there. I've looked into it, not a ton, but there are some books out there, certainly around mindfulness for kids, but there are
Hmm.
some energy books out there for kids as well, like the Psychic Kids series um, is a good one for younger kids. But just talking to your kids about their energy field, about how everything is energy, and being intentional with the type of energy they want to cultivate within themselves and their environment. And we talked earlier about energy hygiene practices, um, energy
In the
clearings in the
home.
household, in the
Hmm.
home, for your children. I was
Hmm.
telling Kate earlier that for my son, when he comes home from school, I have some Florida water, which is a great clearing tool. Sage or frankincense or Palo Santo is another, or other great clearing tools that can be used. But I like Florida water because it smells nice, and I put it in a little spray bottle when he comes home from school. I give him what I call an energy shower and tell him we're just clearing off the energy from the day, any energy that he could have picked up from his
Hmm.
environment, from other people,
I
and
love
just,
that.
yeah, calling in what energy he wants to have around him. And that's something we can do for ourselves and for our children. What else you got?
Well, yeah, also there's a ton of resources on the Star Child platform that show you how to do like make an energy bubble, protection bubble, how to clear
Right.
the energy in your home, how to use tools to clear the energy. That might be more on the adult side of the platform, I believe. So just look, there's so
That's
many
great.
resources that are there that you can look into and ways that you can kind of keep that
Yeah.
going. And
And
I
I've
think
seen
there's a
some of
lot of
those. They're
ways,
great.
yeah, to
Hmm.
to to talk to the kids. Okay, are we ready for the next question?
Yes.
Okay. I experience being around people to be an intense experience, like walking through sound or multiple radio stations that are on at the same time, like fields of different color and texture and feelings and thoughts. No amount of putting myself in a protection bubble helps with navigating this. I have a suspicion that my child has a similar experience, which makes things like school and play dates tricky. We both know when people are lying, for example. Would love to hear your thoughts. I think kind of what we were just saying. This sounds like a person who may have like that synesthesia where they experience multiple, like they taste a smell, a color, or they see a musical note, like a color of a musical note, or things like that, which is just like it's a way to experience some of this energy. Um, I think,
Mm,
if I would still practice using the energy bubbles, and I would focus on what Miriam was talking about, which is like the clearing practices, like where, you really emphasize clearing out the energy, and then also like grounding and some of the
grounding,
somatic, you know?
grounding. Yeah, grounding is huge. Lots of tools for grounding. That's what, at least for me,
Hmm.
I used to feel energy all the time, really intensely, and I didn't know, especially around bedtime, and I didn't know what it was at the time. This was before I was reconnected to my gifts and abilities, and it just made me really anxious. It didn't feel good, and um, since I've been able to reconnect and understand better my gifts and abilities, I think a grounding practice is really important. So when something feels really intense, it's a reminder for me to ground, whether that means like through my breath, connecting with my breath, or some mindful exercise, um, to sort of quiet my mind and be intentional about what boundaries I need to set, right? So I talk to folks without going too far off topic. Spiritual boundaries is a thing. So being
Hmm.
able to say, being able to have sovereignty and step into, your power and know that I actually get to choose the energy that I allow into my energy field, and really believing that. And then in the beginning, I admit that that can be difficult, right? Because it feels
Yes.
like we're powerless and that we're just going to
Hmm.
be bombarded. And I think that's where, we talk about energy mastery, and mastery becomes, it's all about that. It's being able to master our energy field and know that we are sovereign beings and able to, and we have authority over our
Yes.
energy field and what
Hmm.
we allow into our energy field, what energy we allow access to our field, who we allow access to our field. And so beginning to practice some spiritual boundaries,
Yes.
and whether it's
Hmm.
writing it down, this is the type of energy allow in, saying not right now, and
Yes.
I think for whoever asked that question, maybe even asking for um, a mentor, like a spiritual mentor or guide to come forward for you that maybe can help
Hmm.
you with some of that. Because it
Hmm.
definitely is a practice,
It's a
and
practice.
I had great mentors, you being one of them,
Yeah.
in my life, helped me
Hmm.
learn how to do some of those things, and a lot of it was just practice, right?
Hmm.
Grounding and
Yeah.
practice.
Grounding and also like I love that idea what you were just kind of saying is like sometimes that you can visualize like if you see like one of those shop signs in your head that like it's open and it's closed. Like if I go
Right.
into a very busy environment, there are things that I do because I am so sensitive as well. I like to wear hats with a brim that limit my visual field, so I will wear
Hmm.
baseball hats. I like to wear sunglasses, especially if I'm in an outdoor event with a lot of people around me.
Yeah.
I like to wear things to cover my head. I
Hmm.
get protective of my energy. Sometimes I'll
Hmm.
put a scarf on my head or something, or wrap my hair on
Yeah.
occasion.
Yeah.
You can
Scarf.
do all of those things. You can also, it's a practice. Like, and I love what you were saying about really getting clear with your sovereignty and your intentionality because, um, like when I had that really, really scary event when I was in college, a young adult that made me
Hmm.
shut everything off. It was like so terrifying that I went to my mother who, she was also had a lot of she has a lot of spiritual gifts and she was connected and could see things. Everything was through the lens of religion for her.
Hmm.
So like when I first was reporting all these issues, she like called a priest in and that didn't work. And So eventually I was like,
Right.
Mom, I don't want these gifts anymore. I don't want them. I want to shut them out. And she's like, Well, you can just turn them off. And I was like, What do you mean turn them off? And she said, Well, you can just turn them off. Like, don't pay any attention to it. Tell them you're done. Tell them you don't want it. And I kind
Hmm.
of did. And I blocked it out like a trauma. I didn't remember any of that stuff. I still had
Right.
like precognitive dreams. I still had intuitive hits, but I forgot about all that really scary stuff until my spiritual awakening like over a decade later. So I
Yeah.
think you can, you know, there's some people will say I've trained under so many different people, and some people will say that, and I do believe this. If you are like if you're going into something like from a place of fear, or that you are disempowered, or then you will be met at that frequency. It will have, a little bit of control over
Right.
you. But if you claim your sovereignty,
Hmm.
and the more
Hmm.
I've grown in my own practices, the more I see a lot of scary stuff in my adult work sometimes. So, because I can see all the energy, but I claim sovereignty over all of it. And
Right.
it does not affect me because
That's
I'm
right.
not vibrating on that same, I'm not operating from a place of fear, and I'm not vibrating it. So if that's
Hmm.
helpful for anybody, and it's very helpful for the children who are experiencing very scary things, like if at that nighttime, that witching hour, like before they go to sleep, like I can remember just seeing all this stuff in my room and being terrified all the
Hmm.
time.
There's a
But
lot of
if
that. Yeah.
Oh, so but if you meet that with, I'm safe, I'm going to bed, I'm protected, you can call an angelic support or help your child call on the angels. You can make a spray and spray the room, and this is like a safety spray, and
Hmm. Yep.
and you can just say, and I'm in control, I'm in the power, I'm claiming my power here. And actually that
Absolutely.
segues a little bit.
Well, also, I think for my son, I've done that where we've picked crystals, and
Oh
I've
yeah.
asked him to,
Hmm.
pick a crystal that feels good to him or feels supportive and or safe for him, and he'll pick them and put them around his bed. Um, so
Hmm.
looking into crystals for that sort of support is a great idea, and kids love crystals, rocks, and things. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that's fun for the kiddos, but also for adults.
Hmm.
But then I was also thinking back to the person who asked the questions, just talking about sort of being bombarded by this energy, especially when they're out in public. So I was just being reminded again of nervous system support. So for grounding,
Hmm.
whether it's grounding
Hmm.
shoes or
Oh yeah.
I
Hmm.
don't know, like a vest, a weighted vest or something. Not noise canceling, but or just at least noise reducing. Now there's those little ear plugs
Yes.
that you can put in. So it's
Hmm.
really more, how can I support myself? How can I support my
Hmm.
nervous system? And then when you're coming home from places that feel very um, triggering or like sensory overload, if you're feeling that overload, making sure when you get home, maybe it's taking a shower. And I
Hmm.
love telling people to use the elements, right? Asking the water to clear, again, reminding people the power of their words are so powerful. Just setting the
Yes.
intention for the water to
Yes.
clear away the
Hmm.
energy, being
Hmm.
mindful and discerning of what's your energy and what is someone else's energy, um, things like that. So how can you support your nervous system? How can you soothe your nervous system? It feels like soothing is what is needed. Soothing and grounding.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
I agree. So there's one more question that was written in, and then we can go to, I think there's another question that came through on the chat, and then
Okay.
we can see if
Sure.
anybody else has any live questions. Okay, so
Sure.
how to support kiddos at night while sleeping. My child frequently needs me to co-sleep as a sort of guardian against nightmares. We were just kind of talking about this. I used to surround
Hmm.
myself with stuffed animals before bed for the same reason. So again, I think that's a very vulnerable time. Like children feel it, it's like at the night when we
Hmm.
don't see things, it's like can be a little bit more activated time.
Hmm.
And I think that doing all the little bedtime rituals, claiming safety as
Yeah.
and even like doing a little, what we call like thymus thumping, like with your fists just kind of balled up and kind of beating yourself here a little bit gently, and just repeating the mantra, I am safe. I am safe. It is safe for me to be in my body. It is safe for me to be in this house. I have the protection of angels. Like you can say whatever mantras kind of
Mm-hmm.
naturally flow through. Only love is allowed in my room. Whatever feels right, but having those little kind of nighttime rituals, misting the room, maybe you clear the energy of the room together with your child. And I really love the idea about normalizing all of this, normalizing
Yeah.
these practices like for people because it really is I kind of have I am of the belief that in years coming in the future, people are going to look back at our time now and be like, it's kind of like smoking or like the view of smoking as you get further out. It's like, how were we not clearing our spaces energetically? Like, why were we
Right.
smoking on airplanes?
Right.
How could we
Exactly.
not clear our homes energetically? What were we thinking? It was such a mess in there. So
Yeah.
I just want to add that in. And then we have one more from the chat that says, is trauma healing different for neurodivergent people? It's such a good question. What would you say about that, Miriam? What are your thoughts about that?
Is trauma healing different? I mean, I don't really think so. I don't really believe it's
Mhm.
different, especially given that I'm of the school of thought that we're all neurodiverse. But I think I understand what the person's asking, or referring to when you talk about neurodiversity, whether it's ADHD, autism. Um,
Or both.
so, or both, exactly. Dyslexia, and then,
OCD.
then there's like the
Mhm.
nonverbal. So I think it's not is trauma healing different for neurodiversity. I think it's more trauma healing needs to be personalized or tailored to each individual.
Yes.
It's unique experience and history.
Yes.
That's the most important thing. So not every ADHD person trauma healing is going to look the same, just like not every person with autism's or every autistic person's trauma healing is not going to look the same. So I think there's a lot that we've learned, I think, about these different presentations and syndromes, yes, that can be helpful. But I think that just keeping an open mind and not pigeonholing anyone or assuming that what one person needs is going to be the same. So just keeping an open mind. So I think,
That's so
yeah, that's
good.
the most
And
important.
And I also think that when you're doing trauma healing, it's a process, right? This is not a race. We don't
Hmm.
have to fix everything in one day, 1 week, 1 month, or a year. It's going to take the
That's right.
time it needs to take. And what might work for you on one occasion might not work for you on another occasion. So I think to allow yourself to have some flexibility that it might look different day to day, that it might
Right.
look different. What you need might be different on any given day. And I think is to
Hmm.
allow yourself some grace, whether you're going through this with your child, or your child is in therapy for this sort of thing, or whether you have the courage and bravery to go through it for yourself, which, as an adult who's had a traumatic past and has done a significant amount of healing that I will do as long as I need to do, as long as things are coming up, I will be continuing to do the work on myself. And
Hmm.
I can say that as scary and as horrific as things can feel to face some of these traumas, the dividends, the payoff is a
Absolutely.
1,000% worth it. It is so worth it. So please, please, like if you take anything from this call,
Hmm.
know that if you're experiencing any or all of these things, um, and if you are in a place of healing from trauma, just continue to do that work for yourself. It is so important. It will help not only you, it will help your children, it will help your household, it will help any partnerships that you're in.
That's right.
It's so important. And just really
That's right.
invest the time. And
That's right.
when you're ready,
Yeah, we
when you're
will make
ready.
it through. We all make
Yeah.
it through. We will make it through.
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so I think making sure that we invest in healers, who have also done the work, I think is really
Oh
important.
my gosh, please, yes. Please.
So to do
Look
the
for
work
people
to,
who do the work
yeah,
on themselves as well. Yeah,
that's right.
absolutely. It's so important.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then Miriam,
Yeah.
so speaking of which, can you tell the folks here where you can be found and
Oh,
where
sure.
your like if somebody wanted to work with you, do you work with people from anywhere? Do you are like tell us a
Hmm.
little bit about
Yeah.
how yeah,
My
you
work
work.
is remote, so I can work with folks from anywhere. And folks can find me on tippingpointhealing.com or on my Instagram page at I am Dr. Miriam, and book a discovery call and see if we'd be a good fit to work together.
And
So
I
yeah, I'm
highly
definitely.
recommend this person. She is just a stellar human being, and
Thank you.
she's done the work for herself. I can vouch, and she's a very special person, so I can fully
Thank you.
endorse her services if you feel called to it.
Thank
Um,
you.
you're so welcome. And I through this platform, I do offer. If you're a member at any level of membership gets 15% off any coaching
Yeah,
experiences with me. That doesn't include my like full-blown OT stuff. But like I do youth energetic sessions, I do adult energetic sessions, I do, nervous system healing work. And again, it's important that you feel a connection and resonant with your person. It might not
absolutely.
be me. It doesn't matter. Like find the person that feels good to you. The only thing I would suggest is that looking for somebody who you feel the resonance with, who is doing the work on themselves,
Absolutely. Yeah.
who has gone through that and continues to do that. That would be my only
Hmm.
suggestion in looking for somebody. But I also work with this coaching way. I can do remote work. I can do in-person work. I have a studio for that and can do all and also do remote work. And that's all. You can find all that on the platform and on the website. But thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you. We see you. We appreciate
Yeah.
you having the curiosity to see if this is any of these things can help support your child or yourself. And we wish you all of the best.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Kate. So
Oh my
exciting.
goodness. Thank you. Thank you for being a part. My pleasure. Wow.